Hello, everybody, and welcome back to tracking our local shifting real estate market here in Southern New Jersey, Burlington, Camden, and Gloucester counties, 900,000 and below. Today, we're going to go over week 10, which is the first week here of March, and then we're going to go over the most competitive offer that you can make in today's market. So, as you can probably see on our screen here, we are setting records already this year. We have 6 individual records, 5 that we broke and 1 that we tied for this year. So in 1 week for that to happen tells us a couple things, but I think the overarching theme is things are speeding up, heating up, and becoming more competitive. Okay, so let's just run through our quick stats here. So for our total active listings, we're at 1278. Now, we started January in the low 1300s. That kind of dropped down. And then through February, kind of through that lull of the playoffs, of football playoffs, we were in kind of the low 1200s. And then post Super Bowl, we're starting to kind of come back up a little bit. So 1278, a pretty good number. Now, new listings set a record, under contract set a record, and closed units set a record. So highest new listings by 24, highest under contract listings by 34, and highest close units by 92 listings. I think I had to go all the way back to the first week of the year for closed units, and we're higher than that by 92 listings. So that's a lot just in those 3 numbers there. So good to see that the buyers are out in full force, more listings are coming to the market, and those closings are happening. So all of that is just signs of a good, healthy market. Now, here's the 2, and I'm kind of skipping expired, withdrawn, and canceled. We did have a little peak similar to we had at the peak of February. We're kind of noticing that at the end of months, we're starting to get some expireds. And then for our price reductions, again, a fairly decent amount here, a little bit higher than maybe some of our others, but not statistically up or down one way or enough to be significant. But our average days on market, our average DOM, and our lowest median DOM, right, these 2 here, lowest by 5 on the average and lowest by 1 on the median. The thing for me, though, is crazy. From the start of the year, we were at 72 average days on market for listings. We're down to 59, right? So what is that? 13 days, almost 2 weeks in the average for days on market that's been taken off. And then for the median, we've been almost cut in half. We started at 44 and we've dropped all the way to 23. So that tells us more than almost anything combined, and that's that even the older listings, they're either expiring, getting off the market, or being gobbled up by buyers who are starting to lower their criteria, or we're starting to see some of those price reduced homes actually get offers now. But if you want to talk about the competition and the speed of the market, this is what we talk about. All right. Our volume is fairly commensurate with what we've seen, for the better part of the year. And then our last one, I mean, if you could say it's a record, but we're tied for the highest median list price since the start of 2023. So almost 2 full years, going back this whole past year, then going back all last past year. It's not 2 full years, but you know what I mean? Since the start of 2023, we're at the highest median list point in those 2 years. And I would imagine probably going back farther than that because prices weren't as high as they were at this point. So I would say full 2 years. So with all this being said, I sat here and I said to myself, if things are speeding up this much, if buyers are going to have this much difficulty, how do we win? Right? And I've done these past couple videos have all been trying to win in this market, understanding what's happening in this market, really getting into the psychology and the behind the scenes of what are the things that happen because of a market like this. So normally, and I'm going to flip screens here in just a second, normally what I'm about to show is something that I don't give away unless we're going to have a specific private one-on-one meeting. In this, I just feel I owe it to whoever's watching this as my potential audience. Even if you're not going to work with me, I still want you to have a good offer framework if your agent maybe doesn't know about some of these offerings or talks about them in a slightly different way. So here's what I did. I went through and I said, how can I make the most competitive offer? As a listing agent, these are the terms we look for. As a buyer's agent, these are the terms I prep my buyers for to be ready to submit if you really want a home. Now, there's only 3 of these that are required for any offer. The rest are sort of like Batman's tool belt. Use them at your discretion. Use all of them at once. Use 1 or 2. Depending on the needs of the seller, you may use one over the other. But let's talk about the mandatory 3. Price, escrow, and closing date. Those are the only 3 things you really need to make an offer. Of course, you have to give them your pre-approval and things like that. But let's just run through these. Price, yes. Generally, the highest price wins. Sellers can be motivated by a lot of things. They're all motivated by money. All of them. Even if they say they're not, they're motivated by money. One of the things you can use for the price and I use this a fair amount, is called an escalation clause. Now, what this does is it gives the buyer the opportunity to pay less if there's no other offers that push them up, but it allows them to ride the wave if there are a couple other higher offers that come in to still beat them out. And here's the language, here's how we would write it. Buyer offers a base amount of $300,000. The buyer will then escalate $1,000 or $2,500 or $5,000 above the next best offer up to a maximum of $325,000. And so if we're at that 300,000 and there's no other offers that come in over 300, well, great, we get the house at 300. If there's an offer that comes in at 311, we go to 312. If there's an offer that comes in at 320, we go to 321. If there's another offer that comes in at 350, well, we stop at that 325 max. So the only downside of using this is there are some agents, I don't quite know why, who don't allow escalation offers to be offered. Two reasons why that might be. One, if you know you're going to get like 15 to 20 offers and 7 of them have escalation clauses, it can literally become like a math problem trying to figure out whose offer actually escalates the highest. I don't think it's that difficult, but I've had other agents explain it to me that that's the way they look at it. And two, you don't want someone to put an unreasonable escalation, like saying, hey, I'll offer you $100,000 and I'll go 1,000 above the next best offer up to a maximum of 400,000. And it's sort of like, well, what are you offering? You're just giving this huge range and just saying like, tell me what your other offer is and I'll beat it and match it. We don't really talk about escalation that long. Pick a small range, maybe a $25,000 range, $50,000 range on the higher end, and that's about it, right? That's when it's being generally accepted without having a listing agent call you like, seriously. So anyway, so price. Escrow deposit. Good faith deposit. Do at the time of signing your contract when your offer is accepted. I generally recommend somewhere between 2 to 4% of the purchase price of the home. So for that $300,000 home, you might give anywhere between $6,000 to $12,000. I might go higher than that. I might go 2 to 5% of the purchase price and go up to about $15,000. You could also potentially use the entire down payment of what you're going to be using for your loan and just put that down as your escrow. Now, asterisk, caveat, risk. If during the home inspection you have to walk away from the home, but you have negotiated your ability to do that, under that, you may have to forfeit your escrow deposit in order to walk away from the deal. That's a little bit of a complicated connection. You can talk to me separately if you want a further explanation on that, but just be cognizant because escrow and the home inspection we generally talk about together. The closing date. So again, price, escrow, closing date, these are the only 3 mandatory. You need to be flexible. As a buyer, if you have the ability to say like, hey, we'll close somewhere between 30 and 90 days, your choice. That's really helpful to a seller because this seller most of the time needs to sell this home and buy another one. And they need to take the equity from this home to go buy that other one. So they're going to have to match closing dates where they're closing on that property that you want to buy and buying their next home on the same day. And so your flexibility around the closing date is going to be super important. Now, you could put language, and we often do inside of these contracts about, well, what happens if after 60 days you still haven't found something or you haven't gotten under contract? What happens then? Is it an automatic extension? Is it a negotiable extension? Is there financial ramifications if you don't find something at that point? We try and leave that out. But these are some of the things that you can do. So again, I think the biggest overarching theme with a closing date is just try and be as flexible as you can. Okay. The appraisal. Now, again, you need to have an appraisal if you're getting a mortgage. And if you're going to offer, let's say the home's listed at $300,000 and you're going to offer $350,000 on that home, or even $325,000, as we explained in our escalation offer, it's not about how much you put on the purchase price line. It's about how much of that seller's profit are you going to guarantee above and beyond what your mortgage company says that the home is worth. A contract's not about the mortgage company. It's about a ready, willing, and able buyer and a ready, willing, and able seller. You're telling them an amount of money that you want them to walk away with, and it's not fair to the seller at some point during that transaction for your mortgage company to come in and say, hey, as a lender, we're just only going to be willing to lend on somewhat of this, not the entire thing. That's not what you and your seller agreed to. So in those instances, if you don't bring more money and the seller's not willing to drop their profit, that's a dead deal. And so what we talk about in the appraisal line is saying, hey, if you're going to go over their list price, how much over are you going to guarantee? And my rule of thumb is you generally want to guarantee at least half. So I put language in our offer saying something along the lines of buyer will contribute up to $12,500 towards an appraisal gap if applicable. Okay. So again, if we're under contract at $300,000 and the home appraises at 300 or higher, well, great. We move forward. If the home only appraises at 295, well, we have to bring 5,000 extra to closing. If the home only appraises at 290, I got to bring 10,000 extra to closing. If the home only appraises at 287.5, I got to bring $12,500 to closing extra on top of my down payment, on top of my already existing closing costs. And that 12.5 is just given right to the seller to even their profit out based on this appraisal gap number. Now, if it appraises lower than what you've already stipulated, well, you're on the hook for that 12.5, and then you have to continue to negotiate the rest. But at least you've shown the seller and the listing agent that you understand that there is a potential for this to shortfall, that there potentially could be an appraisal gap, and you are willing to come to the table with money to address it, right? So that is probably one, and that's why I put it kind of on this first line here as opposed to putting it in these ancillary lines down here, is that this is really important. I mean, you probably have seen this. If you're looking on Zillow and you're reading the descriptions, it'll say, please state how your buyer will address an appraisal gap if that happens, okay? So that's a big one. All right, so let's jump to these ones. The next biggest thing for me is the home inspection and how you're going to deal with it. Now, I put this in kind of color coordinated. And the way I did it was this. In this top line, this kind of dark green, this is the most protective for the buyer, okay? In the red would be the least protective for the buyer. Now, let's talk about these. So the first option would actually be to do nothing, and that is just allowing the contract language to determine the home inspection negotiations. Well, the problem with the contract, especially in a multiple bid competitive offering situation, is that when you have your home inspection, and if there is one material defect of that home that you request and the seller is not willing to fix, it could be small, but you have the right to cancel the contract and you get your escrow deposit back. Imagine for a seller, they're not willing to fix one GFCI outlet and you don't want to, and you guys start getting into kind of a pissing war about it. You can walk away from the deal over something that small. And that's not really fair to a seller who just took your offer over 6 others. And now she has to, they have to go back to these other offers. Maybe 3 of the good ones are gone and there's only 2 left. You really hurt that seller. So we say, all right, well, let's make this a little more favorable to you, seller. And we'll say something along the lines of buyer is responsible for the first X $1,000 worth of repairs if found. And so we take that home inspection report, we go to the defect section, we say, hey, we were going to ask for 10 things, but items, and we've agreed to $5,000. Well, items 1 through 7 is worth about $5,000. We'll get quotes. We'll, use common sense judgment for how much those repairs will be made. And so instead of, we'll say, hey, seller, we were going to ask for 10 things, but we've agreed that 5,000 of it, numbers 1 through 7 roughly, are our responsibility. So now we're only going to negotiate with you on items 8, 9, and 10. And so it removes at least a financial portion that the seller won't have to do. You're just off the top saying, hey, I'll take $5,000 worth of repairs up front, right? You can do more than that. I've had buyers go up to $25,000 worth of home inspection repairs if found, okay? Asterisk, this one is a little subjective. It can get a little messy because I can get a quote for electric to be done at $10,000 and somebody else can get it for $18,000. It's like, well, who's right? So it can be a little subjective. So I actually find this next one has been the most widely accepted. And that is that the buyer will purchase the home in as-is condition with the exception of anything that has to do with safety issues, structural issues, or environmental issues. Safety is your electric, mostly. There's a couple other things that fall under safety, but that's sort of the big one. Structural, anything that obviously has to do with your basement walls, your structural walls, things like that, and termites are another big one. And then environmental issues are your radon gas, your mold, and oil tanks. So for me, this is the one, and the way I kind of colloquialize it and just say, we're basically telling the seller, I'm not worried about the cosmetics of your home. I'm just worrying about issues that could potentially be 5 figures to fix, right? Something like a structural issue could be $10,000, right? Major electric could be 10,000 or more. Major mold, oil tank, and radon stuff, those could be 5 figures. Radon and mold, probably a little bit less. It's probably closer to like the 2,000, 3,000 mark, depending on what you're doing. But the lion's share is, we're just looking for big stuff. We're not looking to ticky-tack, little cosmetic things and create this whole punch list. So this is the one that I find is really helpful. Now, these next 2, here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to try to say this plainly because I'm recording this. I'm putting it on the internet. Unless you are an inspector, a contractor, an engineer of some sort, you are, the trades inside and out, and you can vet this home in one showing. I generally don't recommend these unless you are just that risk averse or you're planning on like tearing the house down anyway. And that number 4 is You're buying the home in as is condition with inspections for informational purposes only. You are allowed to have a home inspection just so you know what to do when you get in. You can't use anything from that home inspection report to try and renegotiate with the seller or back out of the contract with the seller. There may be some fringe asterisks to that statement, but that's the intent. And that's why I say up here in escrow, this can be risky, right? Of course, I double click it. It makes it weird. This can be risky. Be careful using this strategy when you are purchasing the home in as is condition for the home inspection. You could lose your escrow possibly. And that's why if we get in here and here's the example I give. If you have a $10,000 escrow deposit and then you find $20,000 worth of repairs, what do? Well, you say, okay, well, I'm either inheriting $20,000 worth of problems that have to be fixed, or I have to potentially forfeit and walk away from $10,000. That's a hard choice to make. Now, if you only put $1,000 down in escrow and you found $100,000 worth of repairs, well, that's pretty easy. I'm going to walk away from the 1,000 and not inherit the 100,000. But what if it's like I put $20,000 down as my escrow and I found 22,000 worth of repairs? What are you going to do? It's a hard choice. So that's why I say you should really only do this unless you feel like you can vet this home so well in one or maybe two showings that you can mitigate 98% of the risk that would come with a home inspection. Number 5, I've only ever had 2 people do this to me in my real estate career. And both of you get this email. One is Caleb and one is my mother. And my mother flips homes and is a contractor and does those type of things. And she's run a lot of those projects. And I still warned her that I don't feel comfortable with you doing this, but she did it anyway. And it worked out. It was fine. And Caleb just decided that we were in COVID shopping and he decided that he was going to waive the home inspection. And I have like 2 or 3 gray hairs coming in. And yes, they came specifically from Caleb and my mother's home purchase because they both waived the home inspection. Now, luckily those homes went off okay. But what we're doing with when we waive a home inspection is we're actually going into the contract and we're striking out like 5 paragraphs. You don't even have the right to bring an inspector to the home, let alone back out of the contract based on inspection findings. So these are the choices you make. And I don't say that we use one absolutely or any other one absolutely every time. Look, if you're going to be buying a 10-year-old condo in Mount Laurel, that you may go a little bit more risky because there's not that much stuff that could go wrong with that. But if you're buying a stone foundation homes on Albertson Street in Collingswood or Haddon Township or Westmont, you don't want to, that would be so risky because those homes have had a dozen owners and have stone foundations, potentially knob and tube. I could find $30,000 worth of issues in that home, like within the first floor and a half. So you have to use your discretion on what type of home you're going for, the strength of all your other terms, and then ultimately your risk allowance for the transaction for the home inspection. All right, let's rattle off these last 3. Simple financial for this next one. Simple financial. Revenue minus expenses equals profit. I want the seller to walk away with the most profit, not necessarily the highest revenue. Revenue in this situation would be your purchase price. And then the seller has closing costs. They have their closing costs. And then they walk away with their profit. And so if our revenue is the price, well, at a certain point, we just can't keep going higher with the price because we have appraisal concerns. So we're sort of capped at this, like, oh, if we go any higher than that, I mean, this thing is just not going to appraise that high, and it's just not going to be an attractive item for the seller. So what we'll say is, okay, instead of increasing the revenue, if I want to increase profit, I can just remove expenses. What you can do is there's a debits and credits, at the end of it, and we can ask to slide things that the seller would normally have to pay for, and we'll pay for them as the buyer instead. 3 of the big ones. In New Jersey, there's a New Jersey Realty transfer fee that is owed. And you can literally type those words in Google, New Jersey Realty Transfer Calculator. There's one box and you put the purchase price of the home and then it'll just spit you back. Here's how much the transfer tax is for that seller. If they're over 62, it's a little bit lessened, but for the most part, that's what it is. And so you can agree to pay for all of that, a flat portion, a percentage, whatever it is, you can agree to take a certain amount of that off the seller side and put it on your side. Okay. Now it's going to increase your closing cost expenses the day of closing, but again, you're trying to improve your offer. If you have the money to play around with, play with it. Number two would be to pay for some of the realtor commissions. Now, a seller's largest expense when selling their home are the commissions that they pay to realtors. Now, they will always be paying for their listing agent services, and most of the time, they'll be offering a buyer broker compensation. Now, as a buyer, you have the ability to say, hey, I'll pay a certain amount. I'll pay for all of my buyer's agent's commissions. I'll pay for all the commissions together. We see that sometimes in the mega luxury market where the buyer will just come in and pay for all the commissions for the transaction. You can do that. I don't, this is kind of a break in case of emergency one. I don't like mixing my compensation with adding that to a buyer's plate. That's my thing. I don't like to make a buyer force out to pay me. Now that's coming because Burnett Snitzer, which was a big court case that happened in the middle of the country and it sued a lot of the major brokerages. Keller Williams just settled, Remax had settled, like a lot of companies had settled this lawsuit. But what's going to happen is sellers don't no longer have to pay for their buyer's agents. And so you may want a buyer's agent and they'll say, okay, well, I take a retainer of $7,000 in order to work for you. And you're like, wait a minute, I have to pay for my down payment and closing costs and now I have to pay you? Yeah. As US homeowners, y'all wanted that. So that's coming, right? So what we can do is get ahead of that and use it to our advantage if it makes sense. And then this is like a smaller one. There is a settlement fee when you go to actually settle. A title company generally spits like $250, $250 or $300, $300, and it applies it evenly to both buyer and seller. We can just tell the seller, hey, we'll take on the lump sum of that charge. Generally, it's not that much. These last two, the seller, when they sell their home, they have to provide a certificate of occupancy, which just means that the township has come out to make sure that it's safe and habitable and the smoke detectors and the fire alarms work, right? That's pretty much all it is. $100 to have the home have the inspection, maybe another $50 to $100 to put in new smokes and put in a new fire extinguisher. There are some townships where they look for a lot more than just that, but those are the main things. And so we can say, hey, buyer will be responsible for their certificate of occupancy and repairs up to a maximum of $500 or $1,000, right? And that it's not just a money thing. We're saving the seller time and energy. They're packing. They're looking for their next home. They got a lot of stuff to do. They don't need to sit at home from 9 to 1 one day just waiting for the township inspector to show up. I'll do that. As the buyer's agent, I'll go over there. I'll handle it. I'll go sit the house. I'll go help do some of that stuff. So we use that one fairly regularly. This last one, I literally just call it miscellaneous because this is where you can start to open up Pandora's box and you can put anything in here. And I'm going to end on this last one. We had a situation last year where a couple was moving into a new home. Now, they were both coming out of divorces and they were going to be moving into this home together. And they said, Connor, we're willing to get rid of a lot of our furniture. It's kind of that hand-me-down stuff. It was stuff that we had just kept through the divorce, but we're okay getting new furniture. And the home we were looking at was an estate sale. And they had 3 grown children, all in their 60s. 2 lived out of state. The other one was an attorney that lived in North Jersey. And he's like, guys, I've been coming down to this house every weekend for 3 months. We've gotten 3 different dumpsters. We've been trying to get all of their stuff out as best as we can. But there is still so much furniture. Now, most of the personal belongings have been taken out at this point. There's just a lot of furniture that they didn't know what to do with. And so I talked to the agent. I said, what's most important? And they gave me this full rundown. And they said, well, here's the deal. There's a clause in the contract that says that all personal belongings must be removed and it must be broom swept. What if we just simply omit that from the contract? This way, your North Jersey attorney, guy in his 60s doesn't have to keep coming down here to keep emptying it. He can just say, whatever's there at this point is there. And that won us the transaction. And there was another offer almost $20,000 higher. And we won the bid because we found out what was specific to that seller's needs and we crafted our offer accordingly. So that's where I'm going to wrap this up. And if there's one final thing I can say, if you aren't going to work with me, I totally understand. You can work with whoever you'd like, but make sure that before submitting an offer on a property, your agent is contacting over the phone, by text, at minimum, by email. What is it about this seller that they're looking for? Is it just price? Is it all the terms? Or is there something specific that they're looking for? You would be shocked how many of these listing agents will give you the answer because they want to look good for their seller. They sat at that listing table, a month ago or 2 months ago or whatever it was and said, I understand this is the biggest concern that you have. I'm going to try really hard to make sure that we get that for you. Well, I'm coming in as a buyer's agent saying tell me what it is. I will literally put it in this offer if it's reasonable and makes sense. I will make sure that my buyer understands that and we will craft our offer according to what's most important to your seller. So anyway, y'all, I hope this has been helpful. It's my way to submit the most competitive offer I can submit on a home. We got a really fast real estate market. really fast real estate market here in South Jersey at the moment. So I'm looking forward to this. It's been a lot of fun handling this market, but it's stressful. But woosah, woosah, woosah. Let's just all come together and we'll make sure that we do it right. So anyway, y'all, have a good rest of your March this week and talk to you next week.